Of Aphaia presentation is created by Keyshawn and voiced by Kaylee. A short intro. After the previous temple made of wood burned down, it was reconstructed using local limestone. The temple sits on the island of Aegina. It dates around 500 BCE, which is the end of the Archaic period. This temple is one of the best preserved in Greece. It is a beautiful example of late archaic architecture. The Temple of Aphaia had columns going around the entire structure. On the inside, instead of one row of columns down the middle of the cella, like most temples, they had 2 rows of columns down the center. This is called a double colonnade. The columns are Doric, which means they have no base, unlike that of the Iconic columns. Unlike the Iconic, Dorics do not have a frieze. Instead, they have a series of metopes, which read like a comic strip. Doric columns are typically wider. In this temple, however, we see the columns are more spread out and thinner. Some columns are split into sections called drums. Each drum has a square in the center. They would all have been stacked on a square-shaped wooden pole. Eventually, this pole would have disintegrated. This would help to align these drums. The temple had... structure. The temple had 2 stories. There is a lintel between the 2 stories, so they didn't have to build super tall columns. It also allowed for a cult statue to be placed in the cella. These statues would have typically been around 30 feet tall or taller. This allowed the average person to see the statue from the doorway, because most people were not allowed in the temple. Back then, the temple would have been painted with vivid colors. Today, there is still remnants of paint chips on the cella floor. The Temple of Aphaia has 2 pediments. Both of them depict a scene from the Trojan War. In both of them, Athena is in the center. Looking at the west pediment, we see life-size statues. In previous pediments, the figures get smaller the closer they get to the edges of the triangle. In this one, however, they don't. Instead, they depict the figures kneeling or laying down, but still the same proportions. There are small holes in their chests. This is because they would have had bronze armor on. One statue that sticks out is the dying warrior. He would have had a spear through his chest. His posture and the way he looks at his audience makes him seem as though he is content, as if he is okay with the spear in him. Taking a look at the east pediment, we see something different. This was made 10 years after the west. In this one, the dying warrior again would have had a spear through his chest. The dying warrior's posture and facial expressions look more realistic. He is looking away with a concerned expression. His shield seems to be the only thing keeping him up, shown by the way his arm is hanging in it. The temple was believed to be built between 500 and 490 BCE, but there has been a reassessment of the reconstruction of this temple. A significant body of material that was found is believed to be later than 510 or 500 BCE. That was the date given by the excavators. The pottery found is claimed to be associated with the temple built to replace the one that had burned down. There were two pieces of pottery that deemed chronologically significant. One is a burnt red cup. The reason they believe it belongs to the old temple is because it has signs of a fire, which was in fact the fall of the old temple. Although this topic is being researched, there is not enough evidence to support this theory. Behind the cella, there was a small room. Some believed that this room was used for cult practices. Many believe sacrifices were done because they were done elsewhere on the island. There is a story of a man who sacrificed to Zeus on Aegina to end a drought. Another belief is that dedications took place. They would have been around the outside of the temple. Offerings have been found, which points to a prosperous archaic period. Others claim there may have been festivals of Aphaia. One scholar says they would have been held in the meadows outside rather than in the temple. There is no evidence to prove this, however. This concludes our research on the Temple of Aphaia.